Picture this. I'm standing in my own driveway, holding a birthday gift I'd spent weeks choosing, watching my daughter slam the door in my face while screaming, "Dad, you're so pathetic! Stop embarrassing me in front of my friends." What she didn't know was that 3 hours later, federal agents would be knocking on that same door, and everything she thought she knew about her pathetic father would shatter like glass. Sometimes the people who call you worthless are the ones who understand your worth the least. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against my truck windshield as I sat outside Sophia's apartment complex in downtown Denver, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. 26 years old, and my daughter still had the power to make me feel like a complete failure with just a few carefully chosen words. The gift bag on my passenger seat contained a first edition copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that had cost me 3 months of overtime pay. Sophia had mentioned loving the book during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations, back when she still took my calls. The apartment building rose 12 stories above me, all glass and steel and the kind of modern luxury that screamed expensive. Unit 8B. I'd memorized the address from the return labels on the birthday cards she'd stopped sending. My work boots felt heavy as I climbed the steps, each floor taking me further from the world I understood and deeper into the life my daughter had built without me. She answered the door wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than I made in a week. Behind her, I could see young professionals holding wine glasses, their conversations about stock portfolios and European vacations creating a soundtrack I'd never belonged to. The apartment was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, artwork that looked museum quality hung on pristine white walls, and everything smelled like expensive perfume and success. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" Her voice carried the same tone she'd use for an unwanted solicitor. No warmth, no recognition of the man who'd raised her single-handedly for 18 years after her mother died. "It's your birthday, sweetheart. I brought you something." I held up the gift bag, feeling suddenly foolish for thinking a book could bridge the gap between us. Her friends had noticed the interruption. Conversations quieted as they turned to observe the working-class man in second-hand clothes standing awkwardly in their sophisticated gathering. I recognized the looks, the same expressions I'd seen at parent-teacher conferences when other fathers arrived in business suits while I showed up in whatever I could change into after my shift at the steel plant. "Dad, you can't just show up unannounced. I have people over, important people." She glanced back to her guests, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I called. You didn't answer." "Because I'm busy. I have a life now, a career, friends who matter. I can't keep pretending that—" She paused, choosing her words like weapons. "Look, this isn't working anymore. You showing up here, trying to be part of my world, it's pathetic." The word hit like a physical blow. Pathetic. The same word she'd used last Christmas when I'd given her a handmade jewelry box. The same word from Easter when I'd invited her to dinner at the diner where we used to go when she was little. Pathetic had become her favorite description of everything I represented. "I raised you, Sophia. After your mother died, I worked 3 jobs to keep you in private school. I never missed a recital, never forgot a birthday. And I'm grateful for that, but gratitude doesn't mean I have to keep embarrassing myself by association." Her voice rose, ensuring her friends could hear every word. "Look at yourself, Dad. Look at how you dress, where you work, how you talk. You're stuck in some blue-collar fantasy while I'm building something real." Behind her, a young man in an expensive suit approached. Tall, perfectly groomed, wearing a watch that probably cost more than my annual salary. This had to be Preston, the investment banker she'd mentioned during our last conversation 6 months ago. "Sophia, is everything all right?" His voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "Everything's fine, Preston. My father was just leaving." She turned back to me, her green eyes cold as winter mornings. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. You don't belong here." I looked past her into the apartment, at the life she'd built with money I couldn't imagine having. The art, the furniture, the view of downtown Denver stretching toward the mountains. All of it beautiful, all of it far beyond anything I could provide or understand. I see. I set the gift bag by her door. I wouldn't want to embarrass you further. Thank you. And Dad, maybe it's time you stopped trying to be part of my life. We're just too different now. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like finality. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the laughter resume inside, conversations picking up where they'd left off. My daughter was explaining something to her guests, probably apologizing for the interruption, maybe making jokes about blue-collar fathers who didn't understand boundaries. The elevator ride down felt endless, each floor marking the distance between who I was and who my daughter had become. Outside, Denver's downtown district buzzed with energy. Young professionals heading to trendy restaurants, couples dressed for theater performances, the kind of life Sophia inhabited now. My truck looked ancient among the BMWs and Mercedes in the visitor parking area. The vinyl seats were cracked from years of use, the radio stuck on one country station, everything about it screaming working class in a world that valued appearances above substance. I drove home to Thornton, 20 minutes north of the city, where houses were smaller and dreams were more modest. My neighborhood consisted of other steel workers, mechanics, teachers, people who understood the value of honest work and genuine relationships. People like Mrs. Henderson next door who still brought me casseroles on Sundays, and Tommy Reeves across the street who helped me fix my roof last summer without asking for payment. The house felt empty when I walked through the front door. Pictures of Sophia covered the living room walls, tracking her journey from gap-toothed kindergartner to high school valedictorian to the successful marketing executive she'd become. In every photo, she was smiling, happy, full of the confidence I'd worked so hard to nurture. What had gone wrong? When had I stopped being her hero and started being her embarrassment? I settled into my recliner, the same one where I'd helped her with homework for 12 years, and pulled out my phone. No missed calls from Sophia, no text messages thanking me for the gift, nothing to suggest she'd given me another thought after closing that door. The television provided background noise as I replayed the conversation, analyzing every word, every expression, searching for clues about how we'd reached this point. When had loving your child become pathetic? When had working hard to provide for your family become something to be ashamed of? My phone buzzed around 11 o'clock. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe Sophia had opened the gift, read the inscription I'd written inside the book cover. Maybe she'd realized how cruel she'd been and wanted to apologize. The number wasn't hers. Unknown caller with a local area code.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Hello? Is this Marcus Rodriguez? Yes, who's calling? Mr. Rodriguez, this is Agent Patricia Coleman with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I need to speak with you about your daughter, Sophia Rodriguez. The words didn't register immediately. Federal Bureau of Investigation? My daughter? The concepts refused to connect in any logical way. I'm sorry? Sir, this concerns an ongoing federal investigation. I can't discuss details over the phone, but I need to meet with you first thing tomorrow morning. Are you available at 8 a.m.? Is Sophia in trouble? Is she hurt? Mr. Rodriguez, I understand your concern, but I can't provide specifics until we meet in person. Can you come to our Denver field office tomorrow morning? Yes, of course, but please can you tell me if my daughter is safe? Your daughter is not in physical danger, sir. However, this is a serious matter that requires immediate attention. I'll text you the address. Please bring identification and come alone. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in confusion and growing fear. Federal agents wanted to discuss my daughter. The same daughter who just told me I was too pathetic to be part of her life. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night pacing my small living room, trying to imagine what could have prompted federal interest in Sophia. She worked for a marketing firm, lived in an expensive apartment, dated an investment banker. Nothing about her life suggested criminal activity or federal investigation, unless something was very wrong with the picture she'd painted. The FBI field office occupied a stark government building in downtown Denver, all concrete and security checkpoints and the kind of institutional authority that made honest people nervous. Agent Coleman met me in a sterile conference room that smelled like disinfectant and serious conversations. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with short brown hair and eyes that missed nothing. Professional, direct, the kind of person who dealt with criminals and corruption on a daily basis. "Mr. Rodriguez, thank you for coming. I know this is concerning." She opened a thick file folder and spread several photographs across the table. "I need to ask you some questions about your relationship with your daughter and what you know about her current lifestyle." The photographs showed Sophia at various locations around Denver. Expensive restaurants, exclusive clubs, private parties in mansions I recognized from architectural magazines. In every image, she was surrounded by wealth that seemed impossible on a marketing executive's salary. "I don't understand. These look like social events." "Mr. Rodriguez, when was the last time you had a detailed conversation with your daughter about her work?" "We don't talk much anymore. She's busy with her career, her friends. Yesterday was the first time I'd seen her in months." Agent Coleman pulled out additional photographs. Sophia entering a high-end jewelry store, leaving a luxury car dealership, signing papers at what appeared to be a real estate office. "Your daughter purchased a BMW M4 with cash 3 months ago. The vehicle costs $87,000. Last month, she bought a Rolex Submariner for $32,000. She's currently in negotiations to purchase a mountain cabin in Aspen for $1.2 million. The numbers made no sense. "That's impossible. Marketing executives don't make that kind of money." "Exactly." Agent Coleman leaned forward. "Mr. Rodriguez, your daughter is involved in a sophisticated money laundering operation that we've been tracking for 8 months. She's not just a participant, she's a key organizer." The words felt like physical blows. Money laundering, federal investigation, key organizer. None of these concepts belonged in the same conversation as my daughter. "You're mistaken. Sophia is successful, yes, but she's not a criminal. She works for Henderson Marketing Group, she has a college degree, she's dating a banker." "Preston Walsh isn't a banker, Mr. Rodriguez. He's a convicted felon with ties to several organized crime syndicates. Henderson Marketing Group is a front company that exists solely to legitimize illegal financial transactions." Agent Coleman opened another file, this one containing financial records that made my head spin. Bank transfers, cash deposits, investment portfolios worth millions of dollars. "Your daughter has processed over $12 million in illegal funds during the past 18 months. She's used her education and social connections to create a network of legitimate-seeming businesses that clean money for drug traffickers, weapons dealers, and human traffickers." "This can't be right. You're talking about my little girl who used to help me plant flowers in the backyard." "Mr. Rodriguez, I understand this is difficult to accept, but your daughter is facing federal charges for money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy. The evidence is overwhelming." She showed me surveillance footage on a tablet. Sophia meeting with men in expensive suits, exchanging briefcases, signing documents that transferred enormous sums of money between accounts. In the videos, she looked confident, professional, completely in control. This wasn't the rebellious teenager making bad choices. This was a calculated criminal enterprise run by someone I didn't recognize. "When will you arrest her?" "This afternoon. We're executing simultaneous warrants on her apartment, her office, and 17 other locations connected to the operation. We expect to make 23 arrests." I thought about last night, about Sophia telling me I was too pathetic to be part of her world, about the expensive apartment, the designer clothes, the friends who mattered. All of it built on criminal money. All of it funded by activities that hurt people I'd never meet. What happens now? Your daughter will be arrested and charged. Given the scope of the operation and the amounts involved, she's looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison if convicted. 20 to 30 years? The number seemed impossible. Sophia was 26 years old. A sentence like that would consume the rest of her 20s, all of her 30s, and half of her 40s. Is there anything I can do? Agent Coleman's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Rodriguez, I've been investigating white-collar crime for 15 years. I've seen dozens of cases like this. Young people who get seduced by easy money and lose sight of everything their parents taught them." She gathered the photographs and files. "The best thing you can do is be there for your daughter when she realizes what she's lost. Because once this news breaks, once her friends understand that their sophisticated lifestyle was built on criminal money, she's going to discover who really cares about her. She told me yesterday that I don't belong in her world. Her world is about to collapse completely. The apartments, the cars, the jewelry, all of it will be seized as evidence. The friends who matter will disappear when they realize association with her could damage their own reputations." Agent Coleman stood to leave. "Mr. Rodriguez, in my experience, when people lose everything, they finally understand what actually has value. Your daughter is about to learn that lesson in the harshest possible way." After she left, I sat in my truck outside the federal building, trying to process everything I'd learned. My daughter wasn't successful. She was a criminal. The life she'd been so proud of, the world she'd said I couldn't understand, was built on illegal activities that funded violence and exploitation. Part of me felt vindicated. The daughter who'd called me pathetic was facing federal prison. The world that had been too sophisticated for a steelworker was actually too corrupt for any decent person. But mostly, I felt heartbroken. This was still Sophia, the little girl who'd cried when I had to work late, who'd insisted on helping me fix the car, even when she was too small to be useful. Somewhere beneath the designer clothes and criminal enterprise was the daughter I'd raised to value honesty and hard work. I drove home and waited for the news to break. The arrests began at exactly 2:47 p.m. Local news stations interrupted regular programming to report on the massive federal operation. 23 suspects arrested simultaneously in connection with a multi-million-dollar money laundering ring. The Henderson Marketing Group identified as a criminal front organization. Sophia's name appeared on the list of those arrested. Not at the bottom, not as a minor participant, but near the top. Described as a key organizer and primary facilitator in the criminal enterprise. My phone started ringing around 4 o'clock. Reporters who'd somehow obtained my contact information asking for comments about my daughter's arrest. I turned off the phone and closed the curtains, wanting privacy to absorb the magnitude of what was happening. The evening news provided more details. Sophia's apartment building surrounded by federal agents. Evidence boxes being carried out by investigators. Luxury vehicles being loaded onto trucks for transportation to evidence facilities. Preston Walsh, the investment banker boyfriend, was actually Preston Walsh, convicted embezzler who'd served 3 years in federal prison before joining the money laundering operation. His expensive watch and sophisticated demeanor had masked a criminal record that included fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion. The friends who'd made me feel so unwelcome at Sophia's birthday party were mostly criminals themselves. The sophisticated conversations about investments and business ventures had actually been discussions about laundering drug money and hiding assets from federal investigators. Everything about my daughter's new life had been an elaborate criminal conspiracy. The doorbell rang around 8 o'clock. Mrs. Henderson from next door, holding a casserole dish and wearing the concerned expression she'd perfected during 40 years of neighborhood emergencies. "Marcus, I saw the news. I'm so sorry." "Come in, Eleanor. I could use the company." She set the casserole on my kitchen counter and studied my face with the wisdom of someone who'd raised 5 children and buried 2 husbands. "You look like you've been hit by a truck." "I feel worse than that. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, all the conversations I should have had." "Honey, parents can't control their adult children. You raised that girl right. What she chose to do with her life afterward isn't your responsibility." Eleanor settled into the chair across from my kitchen table, the same chair where Sophia used to do homework while I cooked dinner after my shifts at the plant. "You remember when she was in high school, how proud she was of your work? She used to brag to her friends about her dad who helped build half the skyscrapers in Denver." I did remember. Sophia bringing classmates over for dinner, introducing me as the man who'd worked on the construction crew for the convention center, the stadium, the airport terminal. She'd been proud then. My calloused hands and work boots had represented strength and accomplishment. When did that change? College, probably. She got around people with different values, different priorities, started thinking money mattered more than character. Eleanor was right. Sophia's transformation had begun during her sophomore year at the University of Colorado. She joined a sorority full of wealthy girls, started dating boys whose families owned businesses instead of working for them. Gradually, she'd stopped bringing friends home, stopped talking about my work with pride. The FBI agent said she might get 20 to 30 years. That's a long time to think about mistakes. We sat in comfortable silence, two people who understood that sometimes life delivers lessons too harsh for anyone to deserve. Outside, the neighborhood settled into evening routines. Families having dinner together, children playing in backyards, people living honest lives with clear consciences. I thought about Sophia sitting in a federal holding cell, probably still wearing the designer dress from her birthday party, wondering how federal agents had found her, how her sophisticated criminal enterprise had been exposed, how her world of luxury and influence had collapsed in a single afternoon. Eleanor, I need to visit her. The jail won't allow visitors for at least 72 hours. Give it time, Marcus. Let her think about what she's lost. My phone, despite being turned off, had accumulated dozens of messages. Reporters, distant relatives who'd seen the news, former co-workers expressing shock and sympathy. But nothing from Sophia. No collect calls from jail, no messages through lawyers, no contact of any kind. The next morning brought headlines that made everything worse. Denver marketing executive led multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. College graduate turned money launderer faces decades in prison. FBI arrests 23 in sophisticated financial crimes ring. Sophia's college photograph appeared in newspaper articles, the same professional headshot she'd used for her LinkedIn profile. Young, confident, successful looking. Nothing about the image suggested criminal activity or moral corruption. The details were damning. Prosecutors described a 3-year conspiracy that had processed over $30 million in illegal funds.
Bank records showed luxury purchases that no legitimate marketing executive could afford. Surveillance footage captured meetings with known criminals and documented exchanges of large amounts of cash. Preston Walsh's criminal history dominated a sidebar article. 3 prior convictions, 2 prison sentences, connections to organized crime families in Chicago and Las Vegas. The sophisticated investment banker had been playing a role designed to provide cover for criminal activities. Most painful were the quotes from Sophia's former colleagues at Henderson Marketing Group. Employees who'd believed they worked for a legitimate business, who'd unknowingly processed paperwork for money laundering operations, who'd trusted their supervisor without realizing she was running a criminal enterprise. "We thought Sophia was just really good at bringing in high-value clients," said Jennifer Walsh, a junior account executive. "The bonuses were amazing, but we never questioned where all the money was coming from." Those bonuses had been paid with drug money, weapon sales proceeds, and human trafficking profits. Sophia had used her education and professional skills to clean money that funded some of the worst criminal activities imaginable. My daughter hadn't just stolen money. She'd enabled violence, exploitation, and misery for thousands of people she'd never meet. The jail allowed visitors on Thursday morning. I arrived early, joining a line of family members and lawyers waiting to see arrested loved ones. The building felt institutional and depressing, all concrete walls and metal detectors, and the kind of security that reminded everyone they were entering a place designed to hold dangerous people. Processing took 2 hours. Background checks, metal detectors, paperwork that documented every aspect of my identity and relationship to the inmate I wanted to visit. Finally, I was led to a small room with a table and 2 chairs, everything bolted to the floor and designed to prevent any possibility of escape or violence. Sophia entered wearing an orange jumpsuit that made her look younger and more vulnerable than she'd appeared in designer clothes. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup, her entire appearance stripped of the sophistication she'd cultivated so carefully. She sat across from me without making eye contact. Her hands were folded in her lap, her posture suggesting shame or defeat or the kind of realization that comes when someone finally understands the magnitude of their mistakes. "Hi, Dad." "Hello, sweetheart." Silence stretched between us, heavy with 3 days of revelations and 26 years of complicated history. The confident young woman who dismissed me as pathetic was gone, replaced by someone who looked lost and frightened. "I suppose you've seen the news." "I have." "Are you here to tell me you told me so?" I studied her face, searching for traces of the little girl who used to climb into my lap when thunderstorms scared her. She was still there, buried beneath years of poor choices and criminal behavior, but still recognizable to someone who'd loved her unconditionally for 2 decades. "I'm here because you're my daughter." Sophia's composure cracked slightly. Her eyes filled with tears she'd probably been holding back since her arrest. "Dad, I'm so sorry. About everything. About what I said to you, about the life I've been living, about all of it." "What happened, Sophia? How did you get involved in this?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks on her cheeks that made her look even younger. "It started small. Preston introduced me to some clients who needed help with financial transactions. They paid really well, and I didn't ask too many questions. I told myself it was just wealthy people trying to minimize their tax obligations." "When did you realize it was more than that?" "Honestly, about 6 months in. But by then, I was making more money than I'd ever imagined. I could afford the apartment, the car, the clothes. I could live the life I'd always wanted." The life she'd always wanted, built on criminal money that funded violence and exploitation. "Sophia, do you understand what you were actually doing? The money you were laundering came from drug dealers, weapons traffickers, people who hurt others for profit." "I know that now. I tried not to think about it then. I just focused on the financial aspects, the technical challenges of moving money around. I pretended it was just numbers on spreadsheets." "What about Preston? When did you learn about his criminal record?" "Right away. He told me about his past during our second date, said he'd made mistakes but was building a legitimate business now. I believed him because I wanted to believe him." Sophia looked directly at me for the first time since entering the room. Her green eyes, inherited from her mother, held a desperation I'd never seen before. "Dad, I know what I said to you on Tuesday. About being pathetic, about not belonging in my world. I was wrong about everything. My world was a lie built on crime and corruption. Your world is real. Honest work, genuine relationships, actual values." "Why did you say those things?" "Because I was ashamed. Not of you, but of myself. I knew what I was doing was wrong, and seeing you reminded me of everything I'd abandoned. It was easier to push you away than to admit I'd become someone you wouldn't recognize." The visiting time was limited to 30 minutes. As guards prepared to escort Sophia back to her cell, she reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "Dad, will you visit me again?" "Of course." "Even after you learn more about what I've done? Because there's going to be more. Worse things that haven't come out yet. Sophia, I'll never stop being your father. No matter what you've done, no matter what happens next." She squeezed my hand with desperate gratitude. "I don't deserve that." Love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing to care about someone regardless of their mistakes. The guard tapped his watch, indicating our time was finished. Sophia stood reluctantly, her orange jumpsuit wrinkled from sitting in the uncomfortable chair. "Dad, when this is all over, when I get out of prison, would you help me learn how to live honestly again? I don't remember how to be the person you raised me to be." "We'll figure it out together." As she was led away, I remained seated for a moment, processing the conversation and everything it revealed. The sophisticated criminal who dismissed me as pathetic was actually a frightened young woman who'd lost her way completely. She needed guidance, support, and the kind of unconditional love that doesn't depend on success or social status. The drive home took me through downtown Denver, past the apartment building where Sophia had lived her criminal lifestyle. Yellow tape still surrounded the entrance, and federal agents continued processing evidence. Her BMW was gone, probably impounded as criminal proceeds. Her expensive furniture would be auctioned to compensate victims of the money laundering operation. All the trappings of success that had made her feel superior to her blue-collar father were being systematically dismantled by federal investigators. The sophisticated world that had been too good for me was actually too corrupt for anyone decent. But my daughter was still in there somewhere, ready to learn what actually mattered in life.
Ready to understand that pathetic wasn't building an honest living with your own hands. Pathetic was trading your integrity for money you hadn't earned through activities that harmed people you'd never meet. The education was just beginning, and this time I'd be there to help her learn. The next 72 hours brought revelations that made Sophia's initial arrest look like a minor inconvenience. Friday morning's headlines revealed the true scope of the Henderson Marketing Group operation, and my daughter's role was far more central than I'd imagined. Federal investigation exposes $47 million money laundering network dominated the front page of the Denver Post. Below it, a detailed organizational chart showed Sophia near the top of the criminal hierarchy, second only to Henderson himself. She wasn't just processing illegal funds. She was recruiting other young professionals, training them in money laundering techniques, and expanding the operation across 3 states. The FBI had been watching her for 18 months, building a case that included wiretapped phone calls, surveillance footage, and financial records documenting every transaction. They'd recorded her explaining to new recruits how to disguise drug money as legitimate marketing fees, how to create shell companies that existed only on paper, and how to move millions of dollars through banks without triggering federal reporting requirements. Agent Coleman called Friday afternoon with updates that made my stomach turn. "Mr. Rodriguez, I wanted to prepare you for what's coming. The media has obtained copies of surveillance recordings. Your daughter's voice will be broadcast on television tonight, explaining money laundering techniques to people she was recruiting." How bad is it? She's discussing methods for cleaning money from human trafficking operations. The recordings are extremely damaging to her case and will likely influence public opinion significantly. Human trafficking. The words hit like ice water in my veins. My daughter hadn't just been moving numbers around spreadsheets. She'd been facilitating modern slavery, helping criminals profit from the most horrific exploitation imaginable. The evening news played 15 seconds of audio that destroyed any hope I'd harbored about Sophia's level of involvement. Her voice, clear and confident, explaining to someone named David how to structure payments from escort services to avoid federal detection. "The key is creating multiple revenue streams that look legitimate," Sophia's recorded voice explained. "Massage therapy, modeling agencies, entertainment consulting. Each one processes a portion of the total income, so no single business appears suspicious." The news anchor's commentary was devastating. "This recording demonstrates Rodriguez's sophisticated understanding of money laundering techniques and her willingness to facilitate some of the most serious crimes in the federal system." My phone started ringing immediately. More reporters, now armed with recordings that proved my daughter was a central figure in a criminal enterprise that enabled human trafficking. The questions were pointed and personal. "Mr. Rodriguez, were you aware your daughter was involved in facilitating modern slavery? How do you feel knowing your daughter helped criminals profit from human trafficking? Do you plan to support your daughter despite evidence of her involvement in such serious crimes?" I stopped answering calls and disconnected my landline. The questions hurt because they forced me to confront the full reality of what Sophia had become. This wasn't a young woman who'd made poor financial decisions. This was someone who'd actively participated in crimes that destroyed lives. Saturday brought federal asset seizure notices. Everything Sophia owned was being confiscated as proceeds of criminal activity. Her BMW, her jewelry, her designer clothing, her bank accounts, even her furniture was being auctioned to compensate victims of the money laundering operation. The expensive apartment that had made me feel so unwelcome was being stripped bare by federal agents.
According to news reports, investigators found hidden safes containing over $200,000 in cash, false identification documents, and detailed records of criminal transactions spanning 3 years. Preston Walsh's arrest had revealed additional layers of the conspiracy. His apparent investment banking career was completely fabricated. The expensive watch, the designer suits, the sophisticated manner were all part of an elaborate cover story designed to provide legitimacy for criminal activities. Federal prosecutors described him as a career criminal who specialized in recruiting educated young women for money laundering operations. Sophia wasn't his only victim. Over the past 5 years, he'd manipulated 7 other college graduates into similar criminal enterprises. The revelation provided some context for Sophia's transformation, but it didn't excuse her choices. She'd been recruited, yes, but she'd also become a recruiter herself. She'd gone from victim to perpetrator, using her education and social skills to expand the criminal network. Sunday's newspaper included a detailed timeline of Sophia's criminal activities. The progression was methodical and disturbing. Year 1 involved simple financial transactions, moving money between accounts without asking questions. Year 2 included recruiting her college roommate and 2 sorority sisters into the operation. Year 3 saw her managing a network of 12 young professionals across Colorado, Utah, and Arizona. Each recruit was carefully selected: college-educated, socially ambitious, financially motivated, and ethically flexible. Sophia had used her understanding of psychology and social dynamics to identify people who could be corrupted by the promise of easy money. The newspaper included interviews with several of her victims, young women who'd trusted Sophia's friendship and professional guidance only to discover they'd been manipulated into federal crimes. "Sophia was like a mentor to me," said Amanda Chen, a 24-year-old marketing graduate from the University of Denver. "She taught me about business, introduced me to successful people, helped me get an apartment I could never afford on my salary. I thought she was helping me build a better life." Amanda was now facing 10 to 15 years in federal prison for her role in the money laundering operation. Like the others Sophia had recruited, she'd been led gradually into criminal activity, starting with simple tasks that seemed innocent and escalating to serious federal crimes. "I kept thinking we were just helping wealthy clients manage their investments," Amanda continued. "Sophia made everything sound legitimate, professional, like we were providing sophisticated financial services. I never imagined we were cleaning money from drug dealers and human traffickers." Reading these interviews was like watching my daughter's character disintegrate in real time. The woman who'd recruited and manipulated these young people wasn't the Sophia I'd raised. She'd become someone who used her intelligence and education to destroy other people's lives for personal profit. Monday brought the federal courthouse arraignment, where Sophia and 22 other defendants would hear formal charges and enter initial pleas. I arrived early, hoping to see her briefly before proceedings began, but the media presence was overwhelming. Television trucks lined the street outside the courthouse. Reporters interviewed anyone willing to discuss the case. Victims' families held signs demanding justice for their children who'd been recruited into the criminal enterprise. The defendants were transported in a heavily guarded convoy that looked more appropriate for terrorists than young professionals. Through the reinforced windows of the prison bus, I caught a glimpse of Sophia in orange coveralls, her hands shackled to a chain around her waist. Inside the courthouse, the scope of the operation became clear as all 23 defendants were led into the largest courtroom available. They looked like a college graduating class, young and educated and completely out of place in federal criminal proceedings. Sophia sat in the front row with the other primary organizers. When her name was called, she stood to hear charges that would define the rest of her life. "Sophia Maria Rodriguez, you are charged with conspiracy to commit money laundering, racketeering under the RICO Act, conspiracy to facilitate human trafficking, operating a continuing criminal enterprise, and tax evasion. The total amount of illegal funds processed through your network exceeds $47 million over a 3-year period." $47 million. The number was so large, it seemed abstract, meaningless. But it represented thousands of individual crimes, countless victims and a level of criminal sophistication I'd never imagined my daughter capable of achieving. Her attorney, a public defender who looked overwhelmed by the complexity of the case, entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. The judge set trial for 6 months away and denied bail based on flight risk and the severity of the charges. As defendants were led away, Sophia turned briefly toward the gallery. Our eyes met for perhaps 3 seconds across a courtroom full of victims, investigators, and media representatives. In that moment, I saw not the confident criminal mastermind described in indictments, but a terrified young woman finally understanding the magnitude of her situation. The walk back to my truck took me past a group of protesters holding photographs of human trafficking victims. Signs reading "Justice for the Exploited" and "Money Laundering Enable Slavery" reminded me that this case wasn't just about financial crimes. It was about real people who'd suffered because criminals like my daughter had made their exploitation profitable. One protester, a woman about my age holding a picture of a teenage girl, made eye contact as I passed. "Are you family of one of the defendants?" My daughter was just arraigned. Her expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry, this must be incredibly difficult for you."
The girl in your photograph? My niece. She was trafficked for 2 years before she could escape. The money that bought and sold her was cleaned through operations like your daughter's network. The connection was direct and devastating. Sophia's financial crimes had real victims, people like this woman's niece who'd been bought and sold like merchandise. My daughter's sophisticated money laundering techniques had enabled the most horrific exploitation imaginable. I'm sorry for what happened to your niece, and I'm sorry my daughter contributed to her suffering. The woman nodded, understanding that parents don't control their adult children's choices. I hope your daughter uses her time in prison to understand what she was really doing. Some of these young people seem to think money laundering is just a white-collar crime that doesn't hurt anyone. Driving home, I thought about Sophia's transformation from idealistic college student to criminal mastermind. When had making money become more important than basic human decency? When had she stopped seeing criminal proceeds as blood money that funded misery and exploitation? The local news that evening included interviews with more of Sophia's victims. Young professionals who'd trusted her guidance and found themselves facing federal prosecution. Families whose children had been recruited into criminal activities they never would have discovered independently. Sophia Rodriguez was a predator who used her education and social connections to corrupt other people's children, said Margaret Chen, Amanda's mother. She identified young people who were ambitious but naive, then gradually led them into serious criminal activity. Mrs. Chen was right. Sophia had become a predator, using her understanding of psychology and social dynamics to identify and exploit people who trusted her. The daughter I'd raised to value education and hard work had used those same qualities to destroy other families. Thursday brought asset seizure proceedings that provided detailed inventories of everything Sophia had purchased with criminal proceeds. The BMW M4 she'd bought with cash, the Rolex Submariner that cost more than most people earned in a year, the designer clothing that filled 2 walk-in closets. But the most revealing items were the records of charitable donations she'd made to maintain her legitimate social profile. Over the past 2 years, she'd contributed $60,000 to various Denver charities, all funded by money laundering proceeds. The irony was devastating. Blood money from human trafficking operations had been donated to organizations that helped victims of exploitation. Drug trafficking proceeds had funded anti-addiction programs. Weapons trafficking profits had supported violence prevention initiatives. Sophia had used charitable giving to create a public persona of social responsibility while privately facilitating some of the worst crimes imaginable. She'd attended charity galas, posed for photographs with nonprofit leaders, and accepted awards for community service, all while running a criminal enterprise that enabled human suffering. Wednesday's revelation was the most personal and painful.
FBI financial analysis revealed that Sophia had been supporting her expensive lifestyle for over 2 years before achieving the income level that could legitimately afford it. She'd been living on criminal money since her first year out of college, meaning every conversation we'd had about her success had been based on lies. The apartment that had made me feel so unwelcome was rented with human trafficking proceeds. The designer dress she'd worn at her birthday party was purchased with drug money. The expensive wine her sophisticated friends had been drinking was paid for with weapons trafficking profits. Every aspect of the life she'd been so proud of, the world she'd said I was too pathetic to understand, was built on criminal activities that funded exploitation and violence. Agent Coleman called Wednesday afternoon with updates about the ongoing investigation. "Mr. Rodriguez, we've completed analysis of your daughter's financial records. The total amount of criminal proceeds she personally received exceeds $3.2 million over 3 years. $3 million. More money than I'd earn in a lifetime of honest work. More than enough to fund the kind of lifestyle that had made my daughter feel superior to everything I represented. What happens to people who cooperate with the investigation? Federal sentencing guidelines provide reductions for defendants who accept responsibility and provide substantial assistance to prosecutors. However, given your daughter's leadership role in the organization, she's looking at a minimum of 15 years, even with cooperation." 15 years, minimum. Sophia was 26 years old. Even with cooperation and good behavior, she wouldn't be released until her early 40s. Her entire 30s would be spent in federal prison, paying for choices she'd made as a young woman seduced by easy money. Has she indicated willingness to cooperate? Not yet. Her attorney is advising her to wait and see what evidence we present at trial. That's a risky strategy given the overwhelming documentation we've assembled. The evidence was indeed overwhelming. 18 months of surveillance, recorded phone conversations, financial records, and testimony from other defendants who'd already agreed to cooperate. Sophia's conviction was virtually guaranteed. The only question was how long she'd spend in prison. Thursday brought the most devastating revelation yet. FBI wiretaps had recorded Sophia discussing plans to expand the money laundering operation internationally. She'd been negotiating with criminal organizations in Mexico and Colombia to process drug trafficking proceeds on a scale that would have made her one of the most significant money launderers in North America. The recordings were played during a press conference announcing additional charges. Sophia's voice, confident and businesslike, discussing the logistics of moving hundreds of millions of dollars between countries while avoiding detection by multiple federal agencies. The beauty of the education sector approach is that universities receive international payments constantly, her recorded voice explained. We create fake research partnerships, fictional exchange programs, non-existent consulting contracts. The money looks completely legitimate to banking oversight systems. She'd been planning to use universities, institutions dedicated to education and human development, as fronts for cleaning money from drug cartels and human trafficking networks. The corruption was so complete it took my breath away. The press conference revealed that Sophia's arrest had prevented the implementation of this international expansion. Federal agents estimated that her network would have processed over $200 million annually if allowed to continue operating. $200 million, a sum so large it would have made Sophia one of the wealthiest criminals in the country. Money that would have funded unimaginable amounts of violence, exploitation, and human suffering. Friday morning brought a call from Sophia's public defender requesting a meeting to discuss family support and character testimony for potential plea negotiations. "Mr. Rodriguez, I need to understand your daughter's background and family situation. Federal prosecutors are more likely to consider reduced sentences for defendants with strong family support and potential for rehabilitation. What kind of information do you need? Her childhood, your relationship, any evidence of good character before she became involved in criminal activity, letters from community members, employment history, educational achievements." I thought about the request throughout the day. What character evidence could I provide for someone who'd spent 3 years facilitating human trafficking and drug dealing? What good character had Sophia demonstrated before becoming a criminal mastermind? The truth was uncomfortable. Even in high school and college, Sophia had shown signs of the entitlement and materialism that eventually led to criminal behavior. She'd always been focused on money, status, and appearances. She'd always been willing to bend rules when it benefited her personally. The sophisticated criminal who dismissed me as pathetic wasn't a departure from her character. She was the logical result of values and priorities that had been developing for years. Saturday evening, I made a decision that surprised me. I would visit Sophia again, not to provide character testimony or family support for plea negotiations, but to have an honest conversation about accountability and consequences. She needed to understand that criminal activity had victims, that money laundering wasn't a victimless white-collar crime, that her sophisticated education and social connections had been used to facilitate genuine evil. The jail visit was scheduled for Monday morning. Sunday night, I prepared for a conversation that might be the most important of my life. Not a conversation between a loving father and his troubled daughter, but between a decent person and someone who'd chosen to participate in crimes against humanity. Sophia needed to understand what she'd actually done, who she'd hurt, and why her sophisticated criminal enterprise was infinitely more pathetic than any honest work she'd ever dismissed. The weekend brought final preparations for what would be either the beginning of Sophia's redemption or confirmation that she was beyond salvaging. Either way, the conversation needed to happen. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, matching my mood as I drove through Denver toward the Federal Detention Center. The building looked more forbidding in winter light, its concrete walls and razor wire reminding everyone that serious criminals were housed inside. The processing took longer this time.
Additional security checks, more paperwork, background verification that seemed more thorough than my previous visit. Guards explained that high-profile federal cases required enhanced precautions, especially when media attention was intense. Sophia entered the visiting room looking smaller than I remembered. A week in federal custody had stripped away the last vestiges of her sophisticated appearance. No makeup, no styled hair, no designer clothing to project success and confidence. Just a young woman in an orange jumpsuit who looked exhausted and defeated. She sat across from me without the desperate energy that had characterized our previous conversation. Her movements were careful, controlled, like someone who'd learned that federal detention required constant awareness of rules and consequences. "Hi, Dad. I wasn't sure you'd come back. I almost didn't." The honesty seemed to surprise her. She'd probably expected unconditional support, the kind of parental loyalty that overlooks any transgression in favor of family bonds. "I've been learning more about what you were actually doing, Sophia. The human trafficking money, the international expansion plans, the people you recruited and destroyed." Her composure wavered slightly. "The media is making everything sound worse than it was. $47 million in criminal proceeds. $3.2 million in personal income from money laundering. Plans to process drug cartel money through universities. Which part is the media exaggerating?" Silence stretched between us. Outside the visiting room, other families were having different conversations. Parents supporting children who'd made mistakes, spouses standing by partners facing difficult times. Our conversation felt different, harder, less forgiving. "Sophia, I need you to understand something. I've met families of human trafficking victims. I've seen the photographs of children who were bought and sold with money you helped clean. Your sophisticated financial techniques enabled some of the worst crimes imaginable. I never directly hurt anyone, I just moved money around. You made it profitable. Every dollar you cleaned encouraged more trafficking, more exploitation, more suffering. You weren't just processing paperwork, you were enabling slavery." The words hit like physical blows. Sophia's carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing something that might have been genuine remorse or might have been self-pity. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? That I regret everything? That I wish I could take it all back? I want you to understand what you actually did. Not the sanitized version where you moved numbers between accounts,
but the reality where your actions helped criminals profit from human misery. I understand that now. Do you? Because 3 weeks ago you called me pathetic for working an honest job. You dismissed 25 years of legitimate employment as embarrassing and unsophisticated. You thought criminal money made you superior to everything I represented. Sophia looked down at her hands, folded carefully in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was wrong about everything. About you, about myself, about what actually matters. What matters, Sophia? Integrity, honesty, not hurting people for money. She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. Everything you tried to teach me that I threw away for designer clothes and expensive cars. Your attorney wants me to provide character testimony for plea negotiations. Letters describing your good character, your potential for rehabilitation, your strong family support. Hope flickered in her expression. Will you do that? I don't know. Help me understand why I should. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sophia had spent 3 years facilitating crimes against humanity. She'd recruited other young people into criminal activity. She'd used her education and social connections to enable exploitation and violence. What character evidence could I honestly provide? Because I'm still your daughter. Because you raised me to be better than this, and I want to become that person again. How do I know this isn't just fear of a long prison sentence? How do I know you actually understand what you did wrong rather than just regretting getting caught? Sophia was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with the kind of careful thought that had once made me proud of her intelligence. You don't know. I can't prove that I've changed or that I understand the full scope of what I did. All I can tell you is that sitting in a cell for a week has given me time to think about the person I became. And what have you concluded? That you were right about everything. That honest work has dignity that criminal money can never provide. That the sophisticated world I thought I was part of was actually built on exploitation and violence. That calling you pathetic was the most pathetic thing anyone could do. The visiting time was nearly finished. Guards were beginning to indicate that conversations needed to wrap up. I had perhaps 2 minutes to decide whether my daughter was capable of genuine redemption or simply skilled at saying what she thought I wanted to hear. Sophia, if I provide character testimony, it won't be because I think you're a good person who made mistakes. It will be because I think you might be capable of becoming a good person again. What's the difference? Everything. Good people who make mistakes deserve forgiveness. People who become criminals need to earn redemption through years of proving they've changed. She nodded, understanding the distinction. I want to earn it. Not just forgiveness, but the right to be your daughter again. That could take decades, even if you get out of prison. I know. The guard tapped his watch, indicating our time was finished. Sophia stood reluctantly, her orange jumpsuit wrinkled from sitting in the uncomfortable chair. Dad, will you visit me again next week? Yes. But our conversations are going to be different from now on. No more discussion about legal strategies or plea negotiations. I want to talk about accountability, about the people you hurt, about how someone becomes the kind of person who facilitates human trafficking. That sounds terrible. It should. You did terrible things.
If you want redemption, you need to understand exactly what you're seeking redemption for. As she was led away, I remained seated for a moment, processing the conversation and my decision. I would write the character letter, not because Sophia deserved leniency, but because everyone deserved a chance at redemption if they were willing to do the hard work of earning it. The letter would be honest about her crimes, clear about the harm she'd caused, and realistic about the long road toward rehabilitation. It would acknowledge that the sophisticated criminal who'd called me pathetic was capable of becoming someone worth respecting again, but only if she was willing to confront the full reality of what she'd done and spend years proving she'd learned from it. The education was continuing, and this time, both of us were learning lessons that would define the rest of our lives. Writing the character letter took 3 attempts and 2 sleepless nights. Each draft forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about the daughter I'd raised and the choices she'd made as an adult.
The final version was honest about her crimes, realistic about her prospects for rehabilitation, and clear about the conditional nature of my support. To whom it may concern, I am writing regarding my daughter, Sophia Rodriguez, who stands before this court facing serious federal charges. I will not minimize her crimes or make excuses for her choices. She participated in activities that facilitated human trafficking, drug dealing, and weapons trafficking. She recruited other young people into criminal enterprises that destroyed their lives and futures. She used her education and intelligence to enable some of the worst crimes imaginable. The letter continued for 2 pages, acknowledging the harm she'd caused while expressing my belief that rehabilitation was possible if she demonstrated genuine commitment to change. I submitted it to her attorney without illusions that it would significantly impact her sentence. The evidence against her was overwhelming, and federal judges rarely showed leniency for sophisticated criminal enterprises. 2 weeks later, Agent Coleman called with news that changed everything. "Mr. Rodriguez, your daughter has decided to cooperate with federal prosecutors. She's agreed to provide complete testimony about the money laundering network and help us identify additional criminal organizations." What does that mean for her sentence? Substantial assistance can reduce federal sentences significantly. Instead of 20 to 30 years, she might face 8 to 12 years if her cooperation proves valuable. 8 to 12 years was still a significant portion of Sophia's life, but it offered hope for eventual redemption. She'd be in her late 30s when released, young enough to rebuild her life on legitimate foundations. Has she provided useful information so far? Extremely useful. She's helping us understand money laundering techniques we hadn't seen before, identifying criminal organizations we weren't aware of, explaining international connections that could lead to major arrests. The cooperation wasn't altruistic. Sophia was facing decades in prison and choosing the option that minimized her consequences. But it also represented acknowledgement that her criminal activities had been wrong and needed to be stopped. 3 weeks after our difficult conversation about accountability, I visited Sophia again. The change in her demeanor was striking. She looked more alert, more focused, less like someone drowning in despair, and more like someone working towards specific goals. "Dad, I'm testifying before a federal grand jury next week. My attorney says the prosecutors are pleased with the information I've provided." "What kind of information?" "Names, locations, financial structures, recruitment techniques. Everything I know about how the operation worked and who was involved." She spoke with the same analytical precision that had once made her effective at money laundering. The difference was that her intelligence was now being used to dismantle criminal enterprises rather than expand them. "How many other arrests do they expect?" "At least 40 more people across 6 states. Some of them are major figures in organized crime that the FBI has been trying to reach for years." The scope was staggering. Sophia's cooperation would result in the arrest of more criminals than her original network had contained. Her intimate knowledge of money laundering techniques was helping federal agents understand criminal organizations they'd been unable to penetrate. "Are you doing this to reduce your sentence, or because you understand it's the right thing to do?" She considered the question carefully, the same thoughtful approach I remembered from her childhood when she'd work through complex problems. "Both. I want to get out of prison while I'm still young enough to build a legitimate life. But I also understand that every day these operations continue, more people get hurt." "What people?" "The trafficking victims whose suffering generate the money we claimed. The young professionals like Amanda Chen who trusted me and ended up facing federal charges. The communities destroyed by drug trafficking that we helped make profitable." It was the most direct acknowledgement of harm I'd heard from her. Not abstract references to mistakes or poor judgment, but specific recognition of how her actions had hurt real people. "Sophia, I need to ask you something difficult. When you were recruiting people like Amanda, did you understand you were destroying their lives?" "I told myself I was helping them succeed, providing opportunities they couldn't find elsewhere. I convinced myself that everyone involved was making informed adult decisions." "But you knew the money was illegal." "Yes, I knew. And I chose not to think about where it came from or who got hurt generating it. I focused on the technical aspects, the financial engineering, because that let me pretend I wasn't responsible for the criminal side."
The admission was more honest than I'd expected. Sophia wasn't claiming ignorance or blaming others for her choices. She was acknowledging that she'd known her activities were wrong, but had chosen personal profit over moral responsibility. What's different now? I've been talking to other inmates about their crimes. Women who were trafficked, women who lost children to drug overdoses, women whose lives were destroyed by the kind of criminal enterprises I helped operate. I can't pretend anymore that money laundering is a victimless crime. The Federal Detention Center housed women convicted of various offenses. Sophia's conversations with human trafficking survivors and drug addiction victims had provided education that her privileged upbringing had never included. One woman here, Maria, was trafficked for 3 years, starting when she was 16. She told me about the financial systems that kept her enslaved, how criminals used sophisticated banking techniques to hide their profits. I realized she was describing exactly what I'd been doing. How did that make you feel? Sick, ashamed, angry at myself for being so willfully blind to the consequences of my actions. The visiting time was ending, but our conversation felt different from previous meetings. Less defensive, more honest, focused on understanding rather than justifying or minimizing. Dad, I want you to know that I'm not cooperating with prosecutors to earn your forgiveness. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, and because I need to help stop the kind of operations I helped create. I appreciate that distinction. And I understand that earning your respect back will take years, maybe decades. I'm prepared for that. I want to become someone worthy of respect again. As she was led away, I felt something I hadn't experienced since her arrest. Not forgiveness, which would take time, but hope that the daughter I'd raised was still reachable beneath the criminal she'd become. The federal grand jury testimony lasted 3 days and resulted in 47 additional indictments across 7 states. Sophia's cooperation had exposed criminal networks that federal agents had been investigating unsuccessfully for years. Her detailed knowledge of money laundering techniques provided evidence that connected dozens of apparently separate criminal enterprises. Agent Coleman called after the testimony concluded. "Mr. Rodriguez, your daughter's cooperation has been exceptional. She's provided information that will likely result in the largest money laundering prosecution in federal history." How does that affect her situation? Federal prosecutors are recommending a sentence of 7 years with possibility of supervised release after 5. Given the cooperation agreement, she could be out of prison in her early 30s. 5 years was still significant time, but it offered realistic hope for rehabilitation and rebuilding.
Sophia would lose her 20s to federal prison, but she'd have her 30s and beyond to demonstrate genuine change. The plea hearing was scheduled for the following month. Sophia would formally admit guilt to money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy charges in exchange for cooperation credit and a reduced sentence recommendation. I attended the hearing, sitting in the gallery beside other family members of defendants who'd accepted plea agreements. The courtroom was packed with federal agents, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and media representatives covering what had become one of the largest financial crime cases in Colorado history. When Sophia's name was called, she stood before the federal judge wearing a simple dress that her attorney had provided. No designer clothing, no expensive jewelry, nothing to suggest the sophisticated criminal lifestyle she'd abandoned. Judge Margaret Williams was known for tough sentences and skepticism toward cooperation agreements. Her questions to Sophia were direct and unforgiving. "Ms. Rodriguez, you stand accused of facilitating some of the most serious crimes in our legal system: money laundering for human trafficking operations, drug cartels, and weapons dealers. Do you understand the scope of harm your actions enabled?" "Yes, Your Honor. I understand that my actions helped criminals profit from activities that destroyed lives and communities. I accept full responsibility for my choices. You recruited 12 other young people into criminal activity. Some of them are facing decades in prison because they trusted your guidance. How do you justify that?" "I can't justify it, Your Honor. I used my education and social connections to corrupt people who trusted me. I destroyed their futures for my personal profit. There's no excuse for that betrayal." The judge's expression remained stern, but her questioning continued for 20 minutes, probing Sophia's understanding of her crimes and commitment to cooperation. "Ms. Rodriguez, federal prosecutors have described your cooperation as substantial and valuable. However, Cooperation agreements are contingent on continued truthfulness and assistance. Are you prepared to testify against other defendants, including people you considered friends? Yes, Your Honor. I understand that my cooperation must be complete and honest, regardless of personal relationships or consequences. Do you understand that if you violate any terms of this agreement, you will face the original sentencing range of 20 to 30 years in federal prison? I understand completely, Your Honor. Judge Williams accepted the plea agreement and scheduled sentencing for 2 months later. Sophia was remanded to federal custody to await sentencing and continue her cooperation with ongoing investigations. After the hearing, I spoke briefly with her attorney about what to expect during the remaining cooperation period. Mr. Rodriguez, your daughter will likely testify in at least 6 separate trials over the next 18 months. Each testimony will be challenging, as defense attorneys will attack her credibility and motivations aggressively. Is she prepared for that? She seems committed to telling the truth regardless of personal consequences. That's the only way cooperation agreements work successfully. The sentencing hearing arrived on a cold February morning that reminded me of the day Sophia had dismissed me from her birthday party. 6 months had passed since her arrest. 6 months of revelations, cooperation, and gradual understanding of the crimes she'd committed. I arrived early, joining other family members and federal agents in the courtroom gallery. The media presence was smaller than during the plea hearing, but several reporters were documenting what had become a significant federal prosecution. Sophia entered wearing the same simple dress from her plea hearing. She looked older, more serious, less like the confident young professional who'd built a criminal empire, and more like someone who understood the weight of her actions. Judge Williams had reviewed all cooperation reports, victim impact statements, and character letters before making her sentencing decision. Her remarks were thorough and uncompromising. Ms. Rodriguez, you participated in criminal activities that enabled human trafficking, drug dealing, and weapons trafficking. You recruited other young people into criminal enterprises, destroying their futures for your personal profit. You used your education and intelligence to facilitate some of the most serious crimes in our legal system. The courtroom was silent as the judge continued. However, your cooperation with federal prosecutors has been substantial and valuable. You have provided information that led to the arrest of 47 additional defendants and the dismantling of criminal networks that had operated successfully for years. You have testified truthfully in 6 separate trials, accepting personal risk to help prosecutors secure convictions. Therefore, I am sentencing you to 6 years in federal prison with eligibility for supervised release after 4 years, contingent on continued cooperation and completion of educational and rehabilitation programs. 4 years. Sophia would be 30 when released, young enough to rebuild her life on legitimate foundations. The sentence was longer than I'd hoped, but shorter than she deserved based solely on her crimes. After sentencing, I was allowed a brief conversation with Sophia before her transfer to federal prison. 4 years isn't forever, I told her. It feels like forever right now, but I understand that I earned every day of it. What will you do with the time? Complete my college degree, learn new skills, try to become someone you could be proud of again. Sophia, I want you to understand something. I'll visit you regularly, write letters, and support your rehabilitation efforts. But our relationship will be different when you're released. Different how? You'll need to prove through years of honest living that you've genuinely changed. Not just avoiding criminal activity, but actively contributing to society in ways that help repair the damage you caused. I want that. I want to earn the right to be your daughter again. It won't be easy. People won't forget what you did. Building a legitimate life after federal prison conviction for money laundering will be challenging. I know. But I'd rather face those challenges as someone trying to do right than continue being someone who hurts people for profit. As she was led away to begin her federal prison sentence, I felt a complex mixture of sadness, hope, and determination. My daughter had fallen further than I'd ever imagined possible, but she'd also begun the long journey toward redemption. The federal prison in Greenville, Illinois was a 3-hour drive from Denver. I made the trip every 6 weeks. Watching Sophia gradually transform from sophisticated criminal to someone genuinely committed to rehabilitation. Her first letter arrived 2 weeks after her transfer. Dad, federal prison is nothing like what I expected. It's not violent or dangerous like movies suggest,
but it's mind-numbingly routine and institutional. I wake up at 5:30 every morning, work in the prison library until noon, attend GED classes for other inmates in the afternoon, and spend evenings reading or writing letters. She was teaching other inmates to read and helping them prepare for high school equivalency exams. The same intelligence she'd used to run criminal enterprises was now being used to help other women improve their lives through education. I've been thinking about what you said regarding proving I've changed. I want to use my time here to develop skills that let me help people instead of hurting them. The prison librarian says I could complete a bachelor's degree in social work through correspondence courses. Social work seemed appropriate for someone who needed to understand how her crimes had affected vulnerable populations. Her letters over the following months described coursework in addiction counseling, trauma therapy, and rehabilitation services. 6 months into her sentence, Sophia began volunteering with a program that helped trafficking survivors reintegrate into society. The irony was obvious but meaningful. The woman who'd helped make human trafficking profitable was now helping survivors rebuild their lives. Dad, I'm working with women who escaped situations that were funded by money I helped clean. It's painful and educational and necessary. I need to understand the direct consequences of my actions, not just the abstract legal concepts. Her year-end letter included updates about her cooperation with ongoing federal prosecutions. She'd testified in 14 separate trials, helping prosecutors secure convictions against major organized crime figures who'd operated successfully for years. Testifying is emotionally difficult but legally necessary. Defense attorneys attack my credibility, my motivations, my character. They're not wrong about my past, but I'm committed to telling the truth regardless of personal consequences.
The trials were generating significant media attention, with Sophia portrayed as both criminal mastermind and key prosecution witness. Her testimony was helping dismantle criminal networks worth hundreds of millions of dollars. 2 years into her sentence, Sophia completed her bachelor's degree in social work and began pursuing a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling. Her academic performance was exceptional, but more importantly, her understanding of criminal justice and victim services was becoming sophisticated and genuine. I'm learning about trauma treatment, addiction recovery, and family reunification services. My professors don't know about my criminal background, but my coursework helps me understand how criminal enterprises like mine affect entire communities. Her work in the prison library had expanded to include legal research for other inmates appealing their convictions or seeking sentence reductions. She was using her analytical skills to help people navigate complex legal systems that could determine their futures. Many women here never had proper legal representation during their trials. I'm helping them research appellate options and prepare documentation for clemency applications. It feels good to use my education to help people instead of exploit them. 3 years into her sentence, Sophia was selected for early supervised release based on exceptional cooperation and rehabilitation efforts. She would spend her final year in a halfway house in Denver, working full-time while completing her master's degree. The halfway house meeting was the first time I'd seen Sophia in civilian clothes since her arrest. She looked older, more serious, less polished, but somehow more genuine than the sophisticated criminal who dismissed me as pathetic. Dad, I know this doesn't change what I did or repair the harm I caused, but I want you to know that I understand now why you are proud of honest work. There's dignity in earning money legitimately that criminal profits can never provide. What are your plans for employment? I've been accepted for an internship with the Colorado Coalition Against Human Trafficking. They know about my criminal background and believe my experience could help them understand money laundering techniques used by traffickers. Working with an anti-trafficking organization seemed like appropriate restitution for someone who'd helped make trafficking profitable. Her insider knowledge of financial crimes could help investigators identify and disrupt criminal operations. The pay is minimal, barely enough to cover basic expenses, but I don't need luxury anymore. I need purpose, the chance to contribute to society instead of exploiting it. 6 months later, Sophia's supervised release ended, and she became a free citizen for the first time in 4 years. Her criminal record would follow her permanently, limiting employment options and social opportunities, but she'd completed her sentence and fulfilled her cooperation obligations. Her first independent apartment was a studio in a working-class neighborhood that reminded me of my own area. Simple, clean, affordable on a non-profit salary. No designer furniture or expensive artwork, just basic necessities and books related to her work. "It's not much, but it's honest," she said, showing me around the space that was smaller than her previous walk-in closet. "How does it feel?" "Free. Really free, for the first time since college. I don't have to worry about federal investigations or criminal associates or maintaining fake personas. I can just be myself." Her work with the Anti-Trafficking Coalition was expanding. She'd developed training programs that taught law enforcement officers to recognize money laundering techniques used by trafficking operations. Her criminal background provided credibility that academic experts couldn't match. Police officers listen to me differently than they listen to professors or advocates. I've actually run these operations, so I understand how criminals think and what vulnerabilities investigators can exploit. A year after her release, Sophia had completed her master's degree and been hired as a full-time victim services coordinator. Her work included helping trafficking survivors access resources, navigate legal systems, and rebuild their lives after exploitation. "I work with women who survive the kind of operations I helped run. It's humbling and educational and sometimes painful, but it's also the most meaningful work I've ever done." The parallel was obvious. The sophisticated criminal who'd enabled exploitation was now helping survivors recover from the trauma she'd helped create. It wasn't perfect justice, but it represented genuine effort toward repair and restitution. 2 years after her release, on a warm spring morning that reminded me of happier times, Sophia visited my house for the first time since her federal imprisonment. She brought coffee and homemade cookies, simple gestures that felt more meaningful than any expensive gifts from her criminal days. "Dad, I know I can never fully repair the damage I caused or undo the pain I inflicted, but I want you to know that I'm committed to spending the rest of my life trying to help people instead of hurting them. I can see that commitment in your work and choices. Do you think you could ever be proud of me again? Not for my success or achievements, but for becoming someone who tries to do right?" I looked at my daughter, 32 years old, working for nonprofit wages to help trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. She lived simply, honestly, without pretension or materialism. The sophisticated criminal was gone, replaced by someone who understood the value of genuine contribution to society, from corrupting it to contributing to society. The education was complete, and my daughter had finally graduated into someone worthy of respect and love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.